The final 9/11 letter is by Michael Morpurgo, the former Children's Laureate, whose books include War Horse and Private Peaceful. His letter, with the title A Proper Family, is from a woman. It begins, though, with an introduction from Michael himself.
I witnessed 9/11 on television at home. We live in deepest Devon. At the time, we were living through the worst of the foot and mouth outbreak. I could see the smoke from the fires drifting down our valley. Traumatic enough. But the vision I now saw on the television was apocalyptic, impossible to comprehend. The tragedy unfolding before me was so shocking that I did not want to imagine how it must be for the people this was happening to. But of course that is what you do, whether you want to or not. This was a volcano of suffering and grieving that I was watching. And there was at once a sense that this was a volcano that would go on erupting for years. For me, telling a story about 9/11 is how I try to empathize, to understand as truly as I can how it was for one of those families who lived through it, and how they are still living through it, 10 years on. I have written about the First World War, the Holocaust, the foot and mouth outbreak, and much else besides, for the same reason. It is how I deal with tragedy. I called my story, my 9/11 letter, A Proper Family, and it is read by Juliet Stevenson.
Dearest Ben, Central Park was bright and fresh that morning too. I have your Viking ship right beside me on the bench, the one you used to sail with Josh when he was little. It's the same bench, do you remember? The one we discovered that day after we'd been out to see the Statue of Liberty. We used to sit here for hours. You loved the place. The kids sailing their boats on the lake, the ducks, and Hans Christian Andersen. It was your idea we should come back the next morning, early, 6 o'clock, that you'd set off for your breakfast with Josh from here. 10 years later, to the hour, and I'm back. I'm sitting here on our bench, writing you this letter. Your arm was around my shoulder that morning, your breathing warm on my ear, and we were talking. Hans Christian Andersen was there too, watching over us, larger than life and in bronze, a book open on his knee. All three of us were looking out over the lake at the ducks. A pair of ducks came up out of the lake and stood there at our feet, demanding to be fed. You told them that all you had was Swiss cough sweets and that they wouldn't like them, so there wasn't much point in hanging around, was there? After some complaining, they waddled over to Hans Christian Andersen to see if they could do any better with him. And you said, in your best Donald Duck voice, which sounded to me more like Groucho Marx, "Okay, Hans, so you don't got no bread, huh? So how about you give us a story instead, but not that old ugly duckling story, right? Ugly? Ugly? You should take a look at yourself in the mirror someday, Hans. I mean, who's talking? You ain't exactly Robert Redford, you know? Anyway, what's so all-fired cute about some lousy swan?" And on you went. Silliness was important to us, wasn't it? Over those last few years, it had helped us, but never for long enough. We lapsed into silence, a comfortable enough silence at first, but then I knew the old wound was starting to throb inside you. I could see it in your eyes as you turned away from me. "What am I going to say to him, Ginny?" you said. "What if he just walks away again when he sees me? I wouldn't blame him. But I was only saying what I thought was right at the time. You were there, and all I said was that there might be other ways out of the situation. I mean, they were far too young to get married. Everyone knew that. Josh was 19, and Margot was, 18? How were they going to manage with a baby? What were they going to do for money? And they just got up and walked out. I wasn't being that unreasonable, was I? I knew you wouldn't like it, but I had to speak up. It's not what you thought that matters. It's how they felt. They wanted our blessing, and we didn't give it. It was their life they were making together, and we were standing in judgment over them. You can't just rake over all the old arguments and hope Josh will agree with you now. He won't. They've come over here to America and they've proved themselves. They've made their life, lived their dream. We have to acknowledge that, embrace it, and forget the rest. If we want our son back, if we want to see our granddaughter, then that's what you're going to have to do. It's that simple. Just put your arms around him and say sorry. Please. I was shaking when I finished, and in tears. You took my hands in yours. You told me how sorry you were for everything, how you just wished I was coming with you to meet him, that you'd never felt so nervous about anything in all your life. I tried to reassure you. I've talked to Margot, I told you. She says it's what Josh wants. He wants to have pancakes with you, remember? Doesn't that tell you something? They both want the silence to end, for us all to be together, and be a family again. You looked at your watch then. 6:45 already. I'd best go and find a cab, you said. Meet you back here in a couple of hours. The lobby of the Marriott, wasn't it? Phone me, I said. We hugged, tight, not wanting to let go of one another. And you left, patting Hans Christian Andersen on the knee as you passed him. Wish me luck, Hans, you said. You turned and waved back at me. Then you were gone. I strolled around the lake for a while and sat down on a chair outside that cafe opposite to wait for you. It was still closed. A Blade Runner swept past me, leaning forward, hands behind his back like an ice skater. Wonderfully graceful. I kept trying not to think of the worst that could happen at your meeting with Josh. I made myself think of Margot instead, of how positive she'd been that all would be well. It was she who had done her best all those years to keep in touch with us. Before they left for America, when Molly was 4, she'd even brought her over to stay with us in Sussex. Josh wouldn't come. And you read her Tintin. She was far too young for it. You only did it because it had always been Josh's favourite book when he was a boy. But after that, Molly always called you Captain Haddock. Remember? Margot wrote to us from America, sent us photos of their home on Long Island and of Molly. She always phoned so we could speak to Molly on her birthday. Margot was the one who talked Josh into it. It wasn't easy. And persuading you to go along with it was the hardest thing I ever did. It cost us a fortune in phone calls across the Atlantic to sort out how a breakfast meeting might best be arranged. But we did it. You would meet Josh alone at 7:45 at the Marriott Hotel just below where he worked in Manhattan. And after breakfast, Josh would maybe show you around his office, high up in the World Trade Center. Then, all being well, we'd all phone one another and arrange where to meet and have a grand reunion. Josh, you, Margot, Molly, and me. A proper family again. As I waited, I looked up through the trees at the clear blue of the sky beyond and saw 2 vapor trails as they met and crossed one another. I looked at my watch. It was time. I closed my eyes and imagined the 2 of you walking towards one another in the hotel lobby. I saw you both smiling and crying and clinging to one another. Then you were sitting down over coffee and a plate of breakfast pancakes and reminiscing about the cricket you played in the garden back home and the Viking boat you sailed on the pond and the runes you'd painted together on the workshed door. "Never paint over it, Mum," he'd said. And I never had. My mobile rang in my bag. As usual, it had hidden itself away in the deepest recess, and I couldn't find it in time. Then your text came in. Up in Josh's office. All's well. See you soon. Haddock. It was over. Life could go on. I had my family back. I felt like running around the lake and proclaiming it to the whole wide world. But instead, I did it the English way. I walked around the lake back towards our bench with a silly smile on my face. As I passed by, I told Hans Christian Andersen the good news. And then I did a crazy thing. I climbed up and kissed Hans on his cold, cold cheek. I heard the sound of hooves behind me. 2 policemen on horseback were looking up at me. I just felt like it, I explained with a shrug. Lovely day, man. And he's a lovely man. Great storyteller. They rode off, laughing. I settled down on the bench and waited for you and Josh to come. A call came through from Margot. She sounded overjoyed. She and Molly would meet me at our bench by the statue at 11 o'clock, she said, and we'd wait there for the boys to join us. I noticed the great pall of smoke rising beyond the trees. I heard fire engines wailing through the streets. I thought no more about it. But then there were more fire engines, and the same 2 policemen on horseback came careering past, and one of them shouted down at me that a plane had crashed into the Twin Towers. I went cold. I knew, even then. I saw the second plane come flying in. You didn't phone. Josh didn't phone. I phoned again and again. Your phones were dead. We waited. You never came. Josh came, hours later, and told us how you'd wandered off to gaze at the view again from his office window while he was talking to his boss. He said you couldn't get enough of that view. That was the moment it happened. He looked and looked for you. You were nowhere. 10 long years have passed without you, dearest. Years of emptiness and bewilderment. And of anger, too. Not just for me, but for thousands upon thousands across the world, from New York to Afghanistan. The world went mad with it. But like Margot, Josh and Molly, who are here, sitting beside me on our bench, I can think only of you today. We've each written you a letter. In a moment, Molly, and you wouldn't believe how tall and grown up she is now, will fold them together into the bottom of the Viking ship you made, set the red-striped sail alight, and push the boat out onto the lake. It was her idea to give you a proper Viking funeral. I shall stand, holding hands with them, and watch the smoke rise, willing my anger to rise with it. Only without anger can there ever be peace. Fondest love, your Ginny. Or, as Molly still calls me because she knows it makes me smile, Grandma Haddock.
Juliet Stevenson reading A Proper Family by Michael Morpargo, the last of 5 letters commissioned from acclaimed novelists for the 10th anniversary of 9/11. The producer was Beatty Rubens.